This is the big story about the American F-35 fighter. Here we talk in detail about the sensational military project and consider it from the point of view of each of the three modifications to the aircraft. Moreover, it was told mainly from the perspective of only one modification of the fighter, one that has the ability to take off short and land vertically. In the production version, it received the designation F-35B. On the one hand, it would be logical to consider all three modifications, A, B, and C, in alphabetical order. Moreover, many sources present the F-35A as the basic version of the fighter, which, however, is not entirely correct. But on the other hand, the version of the aircraft with a vertical landing played a largely decisive role in this program. And that's why the big story began with her. Let's look into history and remember how the main events developed. In the early 1980s of the last century, the US and British Ministries of Defense organized a joint project. His main goal was to develop the concept of a promising short takeoff and vertical landing fighter that could fly at supersonic speeds. It was supposed to replace the subsonic Harrier aircraft. Research work on this project was carried out without much haste. The updated versions of the Harrier covered all the military's needs for the next 2 decades. But in the early 90s, the main geopolitical rival of the West, the Soviet Union, suddenly disappeared. The end of the Cold War naturally led to a sharp reduction in defense spending, and the leading aviation projects of that time, the B-1 and F-22, were among the first to suffer. The purchase of these aircraft has decreased significantly. Against such an unfavorable background, the Pentagon began to think about how to move forward with new developments. The situation regarding the promising short takeoff and vertical landing fighter became more and more critical every year. By the 20s, the main fleet of Harrier aircraft will have exhausted its service life, and those that remain will have relatively modest combat capabilities. The U.S. Marine Corps and the Royal Navy of Great Britain needed a completely new vehicle, work on the creation of which must begin as soon as possible. A compromise solution was found in the mid-90s. Many projects to develop strike aircraft for different types of troops were combined into one program. It was called the Joint Strike Fighter. The Pentagon selected the main contractors, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and instructed them to build 2 prototype aircraft each. A large flight test program with their participation started in the fall of 2000 and took place in 3 stages. At the first stage, the aircraft's capabilities were assessed by the Air Force, at the second stage by the Navy, and at the third stage by the Marine Corps and representatives of the British Navy, for which each participant built a modification with the possibility of short takeoff and vertical landing. Competing aircraft differed not only in their aerodynamic layout, but also in the design of their power plants. On its X-32B, Boeing implemented a design with a single-lift propulsion engine where vertical thrust was created by 2 rotary nozzles located near the aircraft's center of gravity. The X-35B, created by Lockheed Martin, had a more complex propulsion system, which included a lifting fan and a rotating, adjustable nozzle. The test results of both prototypes at the final stage of the project likely made a decisive contribution to determining the winner. Against the backdrop of Boeing's problems, the X-35B aircraft showed its best side and dispelled the last doubts of skeptics regarding the choice of the layout of the power plant. In the fall of 2001, the results of the JSF program were summed up at a special press conference at the Pentagon. Lockheed Martin Corp. has been declared the winner in the battle for potentially the biggest aviation contract of the century. It would be 14 long years before the Marine Corps officially announced the introduction of the F-35B into service. This happened in the summer of 2015. The remaining 2 modifications will reach initial combat readiness over the next few years. Lockheed Martin plans to build at least 2,000 more aircraft. and some of them will be occupied by a modification with a short takeoff and vertical landing. Even at the very start of the program, it was planned for the United States and Great Britain to build a total of about 500 such fighters. Over time, this amount decreased somewhat, but at the same time, new and very unexpected customer countries appeared. We talk about the unique features of the F-35B compared to other modifications of the fighter on the Avios Motor channel. The real threat arose in the second half of 2010. That is, just 2 years after the first flight of the prototype, which took place on June 11, 2008. At a time when the flight test program was in its most active phase, news came that the UK had decided to completely abandon the purchase of the entire batch of 138 F-35B fighters, and instead order the carrier-based version F-35C or completely leave this project and choose the F/A-18 Super Hornet. Such a maneuver was explained by a reduction of the UK defense budget and the desire to save up to $15 billion. About 2 months have passed, and the second news has appeared. The Presidential Commission is looking for an opportunity to reduce funding for the United States Department of Defense by $100 billion at once, and among more than 50 recommendations, there is a clause that proposes to completely cancel development and production F-35B modifications. Among the reasons for this decision were technical problems, budget overruns, and missed deadlines. According to the Estimates Commission, the cancellation of the F-35B would save more than $20 billion in the next 2 to 3 years and speed up the development of the other two versions. As a result, the defense budget of the United States was significantly cut, but this did not affect the F-35 project in any way. And the UK soon announced that it will not abandon fighters with short takeoff and vertical landing, but will probably reduce the number of purchased aircraft. In addition, a complete cancellation of the order would deal quite a significant blow to the British company Rolls-Royce, which designed and supplies a key component of the F-35B lifting system. It received its own name, Rolls-Royce Systems. Since the experimental X-35B, it has undergone some changes, but the general structure and operating principle remain the same. The core of the fighter's power plant is the Pratt & Whitney F-135 turbojet engine. In normal flight, when the afterburner is used, it develops a thrust of 18.5 tons. And when the time comes for vertical modes, with the help of it, the lifting system generates almost the same amount of 18 tons in total. With the help of a connecting shaft, the engine rotates the fan, which is located in a separate compartment immediately behind the pilot's cabin in the lifting system. It creates the highest thrust of a little more than 9 tons. Rolls-Royce probably does not share detailed diagrams of this unit for reasons of secrecy, but mentions that the fan consists of 2 counter-rotating stages with a diameter of 127 centimeters, which are made of titanium alloys, using half-blade technology to create the required 9 tons with its help. Thrust, the turbojet engine provides power on the shaft. There are 29,000 horsepower. The second most important component of the lifting system is a rotating 3-section nozzle capable of deflecting downward at an angle of 95 degrees in vertical modes. It provides up to 8.2 tons of jet thrust. Another about 900 kilograms of thrust is created in total by 2 nozzles located in the wing consoles. Air for them is taken from the engine compressor. These small nozzles provide control and stabilization of the aircraft in roll by turning around the vertical axis. That is, the yaw corresponds to the axis. The engine nozzle is symmetrical. For this, it deviates to the right or to the left at a small angle. It is also responsible for the movement of aircraft forward and backward, but it does this only in conjunction with a lifting fan nozzle, which can change all steps using rotary deflectors. A lifting system of this design has a certain set of advantages. First of all, it creates a relatively high thrust, which is quite high. For vertical takeoff, the empty weight of the F-35B is about 14.5 tons, and the lifting system creates 18 tons of thrust. But in this case, there is a lot of fuel and payload for the aircraft to load, and therefore, in practice, Takeoff is carried out with a short run of 150 to 200 meters. The lifting fan is reliable and quite easy to control. It throws out relatively cold air, which means much less risk of engine pumping and a slight impact on the runway. But on the other hand, the system has a rotating nozzle that in the downward position is quite close to the ground, and in maximum thrust mode, more than 130 kilograms of gas is ejected from there every second at a speed of about 34 meters per second, heated to a temperature of 900 degrees. Thus, the F-35B can only be used at specially prepared sites with a durable heat-resistant coating, which significantly affects its tactical capabilities. Another important aspect is economic. A complex lifting system has a very significant effect on the final cost of the aircraft. Judging by open data, a complete set of elevator systems cost the customer at least $15 million, and at earlier stages at $22 million. And therefore Modification B is the most expensive in the F-35 line. The cost of one aircraft in the 2020 purchase batch is $101.3 million. Modification C for the Navy, an 8% cheaper F-35A by an impressive 30% of course. The presence of a lifting system also directly affected the technical characteristics of the F-35B in some respects. It is significantly inferior to the other two options, but this is an inherent feature of all aircraft with the possibility of short takeoff and vertical landing. The elements of the lifting system occupy significant internal volumes, which in other modifications are used for storing fuel, hence a significant lag in the combat radius of 830 kilometers versus 1,100 kilometers. Also, the lifting system has a certain influence on the strength and maneuverability characteristics of the aircraft. The maximum overload is limited to 7, and the afterburning thrust is 1 ton less than that of other modifications. The difference is noticeable, but for example, the deck-based fighter F-18 Super Hornet has similar data on the combat radius of the maximum overload, specific wing load, and thrust of armament. And, as far as naval sailors can judge, he is completely satisfied with the F-35B, which is distinguished by the presence of weapons compartments in these compartments, but it is also available here. A very significant nuance. The fact is that in comparison with the other two modifications, they have a smaller volume and are shorter by about 35 centimeters due to the presence of a lifting fan. The standard AM-120M medium-range air-to-air missiles remained in place, but the caliber of ammunition used for work on the ground was halved from 1 ton to 500 kilogram. It is curious that during a vertical landing, the doors of the weapon compartments are open to prevent overheating of ammunition and components of onboard equipment. There is also no built-in cannon on board the F-35B at all, not because there was no place for it due to the low priority of use. By analogy with the Harrier, it was designed in the form of a hanging container under the fuselage with ammunition for 220 rounds. In terms of maximum payload, the F-35B is slightly inferior to the other two modifications of 680 tons versus 8 with a little, but this is not of fundamental importance. With such a load, the plane will not be able to land vertically. There simply will not be enough excess thrust. You will have to dump the load from external suspensions or look for a regular runway. However, the F-35B does not at all pretend to be a bomb carrier in the Marine Corps. This can be done by the F-35C or F-A-18. Its typical use scenarios involve the use of high-precision weapons from internal compartments. Using the two most important advantages of stealth and wide capabilities of the airborne complex electronic equipment in general, it must be admitted that the short takeoff and vertical landing modifications were very lucky to become part of the Joint Strike Fighter project, which then led to the appearance of the F-35. One can absolutely safely say that being in a separate, independent project, such an aircraft had very modest chances of appearing. Even if it did appear, it certainly did not have everything that was implemented and installed on the F-35 fighters. Otherwise, its cost would have been simply prohibitive due to the relatively small series, largely thanks to the fact that the F-35 becomes significantly cheaper with each new batch produced. Other countries have begun to show interest in this aircraft. Italy, here alone, has long ordered 30 such aircraft and moreover assembles them at its own expense.